tonight's speaker lives here in Perth.
Kind of.
Came out of the woodwork kind of when I think, was it John from Linux Format
Yeah,
posted?
John Knight.
John Knight. As a lead-in, all I can tell you is kind of the stuff that I've gleaned off the website, and from what I know about Lua and Luakit. Lua is a lightweight scripting language, which isn't new, which struck me. It's nearly 10 years old.
At least. No, I think it was
93 was it came out?
That's more than 10 now. That's
2011.
Oh yeah, it's nearly 20 years old. Gee, how time flies. I've only come
93 sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah, nearly 20 years. I've only come across it from MySQL Proxy's use of it. But obviously it's used in lots of places.
More predominantly World of Warcraft.
Warcraft, indeed, that's what I came across. And there was other places, Lightroom by Adobe,
Okay, I haven't touched it.
for those who use Adobe products. And supposedly Lua is Portuguese for moon.
It is.
And
yeah.
that's all I can come up with. But please make him feel welcome. Our speaker tonight is Mason.
Hello.
You don't need it?
Yep. Nope. I don't think so. Sound check. That. Never actually checked the sound. The sound all right? Hello. Excellent. Well, nice to meet you guys. I'm Mason. I do not work in IT for a living. I do this as a hobby. So please forgive me for crimes against humanity when it comes to other trivia relating to programming language history and all that other stuff. Anyway, I predominantly write a micro browser framework in my free time, and it's pretty cool. I just trying to gauge what percentage of us is roughly programmers or familiar with at least shell scripting or along those lines. No worries, about 90%. That's excellent. All right, well, I've got my intro blurb.
Don't let them distract you.
Okay.
They do this.
All right, well, that was already covered mostly by James. Sorry, Jason? James? Yeah. The microbrowser framework is based on WebKit GTK and GTK, and it uses LUA as a scripting language. But first I'll start with what a microbrowser is. Has anyone come across any microbrowsers? So lightweight, keyboard controlled, really tiny, so like usable, or Jumanji, or no? All right, cool. The primary feature is tiny code size. It needs to be able to be learnable in an afternoon or a weekend. That is the predominant selling point for these microbrowsers, that you can pick them up and then within that certain period of time know them inside out and be able to rewrite several parts or near on all of the browser. Most microbrowsers out there at the moment allow you to do something similar to a certain extent. All of them are configurable. And Luakit, my own personal browser, near on created entirely by the user, because it's predominantly a framework, and then the default config creates the entire UI and every user reaction response and everything else. And as a consequence of being really tiny, if done correctly, is really fast. Some aren't very fast. Some used to be fast. I came from the Usable project, which kicked off this entire movement, which started in approximately 2009 with just a simple forum post on Arch Linux forums. And that began a wave of people around the world jumping in to try and generate, try and program and build a browser that they actually feel comfortable using as programmers, because predominantly Firefoxes and Chromes and all that are very visual based and very point and click, and occasionally your control T's and whatever to open new tabs, and you've got some keyboard shortcuts, but as far as controlled, as in Vim controlled, as in predominantly every key has a potential to completely wreck something, well then yeah, that kind of hasn't been out. So there are several browsers out there today that do, I guess, the more complete browsers out there are plugins for Firefox, predominantly Vimperator and Pentadactyl. Apparently is a new one. I haven't tried that one. But they're the more feature complete Vim, I guess, controlled attempts so far at a browser. So this is more of a hobbyist side, trying to catch up, only taking the good parts, that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then, yeah, as already mentioned, primarily controlled by the keyboard, and displays only what you need to see, or only what's useful, predominantly purely the URI that you're currently visiting, and scrolling percentage, maybe in some of them, if they support it, the tab titles, if they support tabbing, and whatnot. Most of them are take from the, I'm not sure if it's originated in Suckless, but is anyone familiar with to do it properly. So yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, several browsers out there are configured at compile time by editing the headers. So the keyboard shortcuts that you wish to use, like your shortcut for opening new tabs, or going back or navigating history, or undoing a tab close or something, whatever, has to be edited at compile time, and then you walk away with a tiny little binary that you can run anywhere that has all your desired bindings or keyboard shortcuts that you need. So that works out well for some people, but you have to recompile every single time that you want to change something, and potentially if you're not that familiar with the language that you're playing with, you could create a bit of trouble for yourself, or it's all a learning experience in my opinion, but some people like things to work. And then there are some others that have written their own configuration languages, which I think is a mistake, because deliberately they're trying to cripple them to prevent, because, well, see, all of them aren't going to be Turing complete. I mean, no one's going to write their own Turing complete configuration language in their own project. So, well, some people will, but predominantly, well, no, everyone won't. That's the point. So it's normally crippled to the extent where you have to in the case of Usable, the browser that I did come from, everything, one of its selling points is that everything is very similar to a shell-like syntax, and that means that all the conditional logic for all the reaction to different events like scrolling a web page, or other property updates like the changing URLs, for example, raises a signal that says, the URL's changed, what would you like to do, and would you like to maybe block JavaScript for this website, or this or that. All has to be done through the shell. So all of a sudden, you're cramming this URL through string substitution into this bastard long shell, single line shell script that is being launched to a shell, and then you run the risk of, there's horrible problems doing that, namely escaping and whatnot, trying to ensure that the person hasn't maliciously crafted a URI that's going to take over your computer while you're not looking, and that kind of stuff. So I really don't like that approach, because if you can't do it inside the browser, you run the risk of opening up other avenues for attack, really. But it depends how people look at it. It is very easy to configure, but yes. And then this is what we do. We have an embedded interpreter in the browser, and that's Lua, which was briefly mentioned earlier, which is a fantastic, tiny little language. And I do believe it's the better way to go, primarily because Lua is great. I wouldn't recommend doing it for everything. Depends what the language is really, depends how familiar you are with it, and depends how much time you have to devote to making sure that the language that you're embedding is not going to, again, take over your computer, if that's something you care about. So Python, for example, is a common embedded, well, I guess as a side, as like an afterthought, an embedded configuration language. But I had that option. I chose to go Lua because it was originally designed to be a configuration language, and it has some very nice aspects, like no I/O primitives installed, and no other avenue for talking with the system externally, only communicating internally if you wish it. So everything that it can do, you have to provide to Lua. So if it has some capacity to rename a file or something, you have to actually supply that function that allows it to do that. So I think that's really nice. Of course, we don't go to that extent. We don't need it to be locked down because there's no direct avenue for websites that you're visiting to actually execute Lua code. So it's not really a problem, but it is a nice feature. And then there's some browsers written in Python that just use the normal wrappers for GTK and WebKit GTK that allow you to just configure it in the same language it's written in, which is nice. Of course, that also applies to C, so the browsers that are written in C, you configure in C, but whatever. And then the primary feature, it's in the name, micro browsers. It only does what you need to do to browse the web. It doesn't need a sundial. It doesn't need it doesn't need all that other wank. If your code base is looking at multi-million lines of code, there's undoubtedly room for error in there, and it'd be very difficult to debug. And it's very difficult for people to just come along and open it up and go, all right, I would like to rearrange this in this fashion, and then just spend the next week trying to figure out how the fuck you get back to the starting point. So it's not really friendly. Multi-million line code bases and of these popular browsers, Chrome and Firefox. So you sometimes just can't walk off the street in an afternoon and learn it, or at least potentially learn enough to do what they wish. So I like it, doing exactly what you need it to do, and yeah, that's how I prefer it. That's how I wrote it. And then the other micro browsers out there. You got Usable, which I talked briefly about. Jumanji. I mean, these are just an afterthought for anyone that's got the slides at home if you want to check them out. I mean, I don't plan to sell you guys on micro browsers or Vim or Vim controlled or other things. I mean, it's very religious, but it does have its uses. So most purely due to efficiency, I believe, chose to go with the Vim controlled. So that means it's modal, and different modes respond differently to different inputs from the user. Like there's specific modes for entering in text directly into web forms, and other modes capture all your input and try to evaluate it through some set of bindings that react, like control your history or some other feature. Or you've got your command mode, for example. And then the side feature of that is who would want to use a Vim control browser and then have to use their mouse all the time to navigate links. So there is a feature in most of them which allow mouseless navigation of web pages through following hints. So every link on the page is given a unique number or a unique set of characters or unique identifier of some kind, which allows you to select what you would like to follow, and then that following just navigates it. Or due to different following modes, you could focus that element or download that element or view the source image of that element, or go into a multi-opening mode where you just rattle off numbers and it opens new tabs from those numbers. It's pretty nice. not all features, not all microbrowsers or browsers for that instance have all those features, but we've done a bit of work on it. So yeah, the other thing to say is just because it's a microbrowser doesn't mean it can't do things that you're expecting. So it still does, it still has support for downloading, history, cookie handling, bookmarks, plugin support. I mean, yeah, even on the micro side, you still have plugins that people want to use. Not everyone's interested in selectively blocking JavaScript and plugins for different domains. I mean, I do it myself, but not everyone's interested in that. So you, at either compile time or by changing the configs, you can remove that feature entirely depending on what you want. It's all that choice, really. It all comes down to rapid prototyping and choice. You do what you want and nothing more or nothing less. And then, yeah, so what is Luakit? It's primarily a framework with a tiny Lua API, and that API has several wrappers around only a few GTK widgets. It's designed to be a really tiny API. So we only wrap around the widgets that are required to build the current interface. The current default config does a pretty good job of demonstrating the current features of that, but we don't need buttons, we don't need image areas, we don't need rocker switches or option selectors, we don't need that. So just sticking to the basics, windows, alignment boxes, so your horizontal and vertical alignment boxes, and your labels, and the WebView widget, which is part of WebKit. And then the bindings also include the ability to rewrite the history of a WebView widget and all this other wonderful stuff. We've done a bit of work on the backside to make it pretty nice. So you can close a tab and maintain the history of that tab without having to actually keep it hidden. You can destroy it completely and then just save a table which has a list of the URIs that view went to and the current pointer in the history index that it's at, and then just rewrite that directly onto another brand new widget that you create to give it the illusion of having been restored. So yeah, it's a bit of stuff behind the scenes that is pretty nice. Then we have other bindings for libsoup, for cookie handling. That's obviously fairly important. Then this is really nice. There's a little library out there called libunique, which allows you to pretty simply, pretty quickly, with a couple of functions, create single instance applications. So using dbus, you just put in a unique name for your application, and then it sends a message saying, I've just detected another one starting up. What would you like to do? I would like to open that in my current window, and that kind of stuff. So yeah, this is all presented to the user. We've got a fair amount of documentation, but still missing a bit. I've only just started going through it fairly late, and at the moment, 22% of the code base is comments, but it's still, I'm only covering about a fifth of the API. So I've still got a while to go. And then, yeah, probably the smallest SQLite bindings you'll ever see. One object, one call to actually create the instance, and then 2 or so functions to actually execute queries and other stuff. Really tiny, all you need, and it's fine. Everything else is actually done inside different pragma queries and whatnot. But yeah, you've got the framework side, and then you've got the side that everyday users will be interested in, which is the default config, which creates a virtually indistinguishable experience to other Vim-like and other microbrowsers. So everything's created in that default config. You're not forced to have anything that you don't like. You can basically pick and choose as you wish, and everything's very simple to just open up and say, with a couple of character changes here and there, completely rewrite your entire interface, or reorder some statements that affect the packing of certain widgets, and then everything's reversed, or however you prefer. Yeah, so puts these parts of the browser directly in your control. So don't like cookies, don't like downloading, don't like history, don't like link following, just remove them from your config and everything should work fine. Haven't done it recently, so I don't know if anything's going to break if you do that. But yeah, that's the point. Everything's optional. Everything's is what you like. So there's some statistics. I first started this about 16 months ago after spending a year in the usable project. Didn't quite like how it turned out. I helped create its current bastardized form. I helped write the Python event manager for usable, and that just turned into a big train wreck. And there's only so high you can stack those pile of cards before something starts to fall. People experiencing problems with it on a daily basis, I just decided that's not the way to do it. I have my own ideas, and then spent the next week trying to search for, well, obviously there's been a lingering thought in the back of my mind for a while to actually start it, but yeah, went ahead and at work on my mobile phone, read through the Lua reference manual, and then the next morning after night shift just started. It was pretty good. I lifted the API, the signaling API, directly off the awesome window manager. I'm not sure if you guys have come across that before. The awesome window manager. It's no. This thing, tiling window manager. Have you guys come across tiling window managers before, or other lightweight? Okay, well, very nice. Offers different options about arranging your windows. So programmers particularly love it because a couple of button clicks away and you've got two windows stacked however you like it, or then you've got all these shortcuts for scrolling between the screens and whatever. It's really nice. Anyway, they use LUA predominantly for their config, and that's this entire window manager appearance that you see in the moment is created through Lua. So I stole that API and just retrofitted it directly onto a couple of GTK widgets, and then from there, a weekend of not being able to compile something to a bit later, started to get something that was fairly passable. And then a few months later, I did a first release. So yeah, as it stands at the moment, after 16 months, we have 130,000 lines of Git revision history, which is a bit. I've spent a bit of time on it. And it's also detecting renames as well. So it was 170,000, but yeah, that's 130,000 lines of unique changes. No, 27 contributors. And then Ola, something. It's a like a social network for coders, something or other. I don't really spend much time on it, but it aggregated my project and it has all these fun little stats, like you have extremely well commented source code and you're predominantly written in this language. I'm like, oh, thanks. But yeah, I mean, the top 2% of all projects on there. Given that there's thousands, it's not really something to brag, but whatever. And then, then there's GitHub. Programmers among us might have come across it. It's a really nice way to share code between each other, and you can watch and contribute and fork and send back improvements to all these other different people through like a social aspect. It's not for everyone, but it seems to work out pretty well. Plus, I love Git, so it works out all right. So yeah, there's 100 watches and 30 forks in GitHub, which is fairly large. That puts it as the second most forked project on GitHub under the Lua category. Obviously, the first one is a bit more impressive at 500 forks, but you know, whatever. Tita Q or something or other. It's something that I'm not interested in. I didn't actually go into it. I just thought, oh, that's all right. I pale in comparison to that, but that's all right. So yeah, the other thing is I have absolutely no idea how many users are out there for this. According to Google Analytics, at least 25,000 unique people have tried it at one point, but I have no way of telling how many people are currently using it. So that's interesting. But I get quite a few emails and patches and whatever, contributors dropping by every week to let me know. And the main C, even though it's 130,000 of Git revision history, the actual size of the C code base is less than 6,000 lines. So I do like to keep it tiny. As I said, something you can learn in the afternoon if that's something that interests you. Yeah, so why did I choose Lua? It has an extremely easy API. everything is stack-based. As if you can imagine arguments to a function, your first argument is like 10, second argument is a Boolean value of true, and the third argument is a table. That just gets dumped on a stack. As index 1 is your 10, index 2 is your Boolean. You just check the type and then say, all right, I can use this, and then continue on your way. I mean, it's dead simple. But it does lead to a few problems. You have to be absolutely religious about checking for stack leaks, like leaving things on the stack or trusting the user, which is a big no-no. Because if you return values from a function, depending on how you do it, you have the potential to leave that on the stack, and then the stack just grows insanely every time you raise a signal or something, and you leave the values there. Every time successively you call that, all of a sudden the stack's going to reach a couple of thousand items long, and then you get a crash of some kind. And it's actually yes, through a very tiny set of functions. Just a couple in Lua. The reference menu is tiny. Like I said, I went through it on my phone at work in a couple of hours. Yeah, it's got a couple of basic types. So numbers, booleans, coroutines, functions, and tables, which is their magic type, which is used to implement everything from arrays, lists, sets, whatever really. And it's also used for their object-oriented programming, because you can have meta tables on tables. You assign it a meta table, and depending on the meta fields, I think they call it, of that meta table. Anyway, you can define your own lookup methods and assignment methods, so you can turn it into, and call methods as well, so you can turn it into a, yeah, it doesn't force you to choose one object-oriented paradigm. You can do whatever you like, really. And the Lua user wikis has hundreds of examples of really creative ways to emulate other languages' object models. And this one that we're using at the moment is as close to Python as you probably get it. So it's fairly familiar for people that haven't done much Lua before, or yeah. And extremely fast. Lua, the reference implementation, the straight binary you're going to get from lua.org, is already faster than your Pythons, Perls, PHPs, and everything else. It's virtually one of the fastest interpreted languages out there, the reference implementation. And then Luakit, which is a tracing JIT compiler for Lua, I think predominantly because of the tiny code size and the tiny number of keywords and the way that the language is structured, is able to beat the large majority of almost anything out there, actually. It's on par with Java 6 in server mode, if anyone is familiar with that, which is only a fraction slower than direct compiled C++. So that is not bad for a interpreted language. So of course, the other great feature is they have a release cycle every like 5 years, so every version out there at the moment is the one version. So you can directly interchange Lua with Luakit, because it provides the exact same external API. So if you just compile against Luakit instead of Lua, you gain that speed factor of having your configuration language performance as fast as compiled C++, nearabouts. You know, we're talking about a tiny factor lower. All benchmarks are crap, but I should have brought a table with me, but yeah, just a tiny fraction slower. It's very nice. And then the actual size of the language is important too. At the moment, with batteries included, it's less than 150 kilobytes statically compiled into your application. So it's fantastic for people that have size issues or requirements of that nature. But it can be less. I have heard of people getting it under 100 by removing the auxiliary libraries, but they're useful. So it depends how sadistic you want to be. And then, yeah, as I said, originally intended as an extension or scripting language. So very nice in that respect. Potentially not as good for building a complete application by using predominantly Lua, because it doesn't have the batteries included. It doesn't have all the infrastructure for controlling event loops and all that wonderful stuff. And people have obviously written bindings for stuff that does that for you. readily available bindings for GTK and all those other wonderful things, but potentially you might want to go Python if you want a interpreted, friendly language for an application. But yeah, in our situation, it works perfectly. And then it's also a very modern language, very nice. It has an incredible amount of features. So yeah, the most important, I guess, is, well, there's a couple of interesting things in there, but you know, I don't want to teach you Lua, because I can't do a good job as just a 2-minute Google search to a tutorial, but yeah, it has a very nice array of features. It's very modern. You will not feel out of place using it. It has everything that you could possibly desire coming from Python. I was originally a Python developer and just quit Python overnight and started Lua. Worked out well. Yeah. And then the other thing is it's easy to learn. Relative to beginners, the language is that tiny because it only has 20 keywords and near on 20 operators. It doesn't have any of that compound assignment operators. Very, very tiny language, tiny section of keywords. Very easy to learn. Everything's fairly verbose. The API is really tiny. The internal libraries that it comes with it, like purely for string manipulation and table manipulation, are also really tiny. They don't even have any mechanism in the core language for actual slicing of strings. Obviously you can index from, yeah, it's very tiny. It has what you need. It has barely what you need, in fact. So you have to write it yourself. It's very nice. And the other thing is plenty of non-developers use it. It has a huge amount of momentum in the gaming world. So people that play World of Warcraft and Lightbox, the Lightroom, Light something or other. So, you know, if you can imagine, all the artsy developers the artsy people aren't predominantly developers. So it's very easy for them to pick up and use and cut and paste and manipulate as they wish. So that is another nice aspect. So you don't have to be a programmer to be able to edit it, because the default config is pretty complete, I guess. Pretty, well, batteries included, I guess. So that you don't need to do too much if you're just interested in a pretty stock standard micro browsing experience. But it does have a few disadvantages. I would give an ARM for a continue keyword. A continue keyword, as in, you know, a for loop or something. It is driving me nuts. To go to the next item. Yeah. Yeah, in the same way the C or Python or something else. Yeah.
For Perl programmers, that is the next one.
Yeah.
For people who use real names.
So, you know, it's obviously a personal tripe, but I don't know. I have a thing about nested blocks. I like to have all my preconditions in a row, and then say, if this fails that, just jump immediately to the next one. I don't want to have like a pyramid of conditions that I'm checking. So, you know, I would like that, but that's how tiny the language is. And then, as I mentioned earlier, stack corruption is a bitch. Had a problem for the first 2 months of the browser being out there that all signals generated from the top level of the browser, because every time it enters and exits the C, what do you call it, C state, and then into the Lua state, it creates like a little mask, and it resets the counter. It's not the true index, it's just everything from this point on is now counting again from 1. So it allows you to, in your C functions, index from 1 without having to take into account the thousands of other functions that led to calling that. So that's nice, but it means that at the top level, if you leave anything on the stack, everything's going to be offset. So I had a problem where all my signals for different things like you know, a user's clicked a button or something or other were all failing because I had this erroneous item left there from when I originally did the port from the awesome window manager. I just lifted the API directly off and just put it straight on and changed a couple of things where it seemed appropriate, because I was using a slightly larger, what do you call it? It's not really a framework, it's more of a library. glib, I'm not sure if anyone's had any experience with it, but yeah, they already have types for binary search trees and pointer arrays and singly linked lists and stuff. So I could get rid of all that and just put in that from glib. But the original point was, yeah, I left the package because there's a module called package which controls the input paths for various config files or libraries you have around your system. I actually left that on the stack, and that was causing everything to be wrecked afterwards. So you have to be very careful with what you do with the stack, really, what you leave on there, because it will be a pain in the ass to try and find. Yeah, here's a favourite one that everyone loves to hate. Array indices start at 1.
They do not. They start at 0.
They should start at 0. I completely agree. So I spent the last 16 months having off by 1 errors everywhere. So, you know, they like it. I do believe it should be starting at 0, but it's something you can get over, really. It's something that I got over, at least. And then the other thing is, every variable that's undefined is just nil. So if you make a spelling mistake somewhere in a variable name, it is perfectly valid for that not to raise an error. It will not do anything. It will just use that as nil. So if you misplace a couple of words, get them switched around or whatever, and you're wondering why something doesn't work or something's not loading correctly, you'll have no indication whatsoever. So yeah, I mean, of course, if you use a language as long as 16 months, you do get a bit of a feel for some of its disadvantages, but I do believe the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, but that's a couple of favourites of mine. Yeah, that's pretty good. So yeah, obviously been trucking along for a long time now, quite a few users, and it's available in quite a few places. It's available in Gentoo, Fedora, Debian, Ubuntu, some free BSDs, or some BSDs. It's also compilable on Mac. So yeah, a lot of support for different systems, and a lot of people currently package it, so you'll most likely find it in your current system's package manager when you go home. So that's very nice. But in some cases in the testing repositories only, so may require a bit of a... I haven't had anyone to test it. More than willing to give it a shot, but I don't have any window boxes lying around. Yes, so... Oh, and it's a framework. So hopefully I'm not going to scare you terribly much now, but I do have some examples of using that framework to create your own browser right in front of your eyes. A couple of quick examples. Hopefully that'll be all right.
It's time for a live demo. That's all dangerous.
So,
The XCA curse of live demos.
yes, I can. That might work. How's that? You want larger? Yep, all right. So let's see how that works. I don't even think I'm going to fit 80 characters on the line. That's going to be interesting. Okay. At its very basic, just create a window widget and let's show it. So I don't obviously have time to introduce you to the full API, but hopefully just give you this is all available online, by the way, so if you were interested, you'll be able to follow along in your own time or whatever. So yeah, nothing's going to happen. As you can see, it was just a window, so we're not waiting for anything. It's quite literally just going to be a blank window. And it also doesn't exit either, so that's another nice thing. In the next iteration, we have a signal handler chucked on to the window destroy signal, which then says, all right, now you should quit. So really you have to do everything yourself, but it works out all right. You just have to take it for granted that all this does work out. So running that second one, immediately after I close it, it's not still running in the background, it does close itself. So that's very nice. Then let's go for what we're all here for, the actual WebKit WebView widget creation. So, also another note about Lua syntax. It's very nice very nice for functional people. If you only have one argument to a function, you don't have to supply the parentheses. It is nice. It is very different. So yeah, what I'm actually passing to this widget class is a table.
This from strict on.
Yeah, with a table with a keyword argument for the type of widget I'd like to create. But yeah, so I just thought I'd mention that. And then another note about Lua syntax. This colon index lookup of this table, or in this case an object, is actually just syntactic sugar for calling it with itself as a first argument. So that is very nice. So, like I said, it really doesn't force you either way with different object-oriented models. So that's a very nice way to, yeah, I think it's very nice because you can just add functions to a table, and that table is a pretend object, and then by calling it with the colon, you're passing that pretend object to every function call. Yeah, it works out fairly nice. But yeah, it's certainly something different than other languages, so I thought I'd mention it. But yeah, so obviously my hand pointing here is not going to relate to over there, but yeah, we've got a window creation from the first time, then destroy the window when it closes, create the web view, maybe, something like that. And then here's our initial window object down here. Whoops. And I've just assigned the child property the WebView widget, so the predominant widget for that that's going to be in that window is the WebView widget. So when we navigate to a URI, it's going to show us. So exit. If my internet is working. No, it isn't, but that's good enough. Just see if this is still running. Whoops. Fonts are pretty horrible, actually. I don't think I can see myself. I know, there we go. Nope. We don't have internet for this presentation. I'm sorry to say. Okay. Which does affect us a little bit. The next example adds a simple label widget. Okay, I've now got rid of the WebView widget as the main child of the window, and now I've put in a vertical alignment box, a VBox, so that we can pack multiple items in, and progressively, depending on the size requests of each widget, it just orders them like a pizza box, the progressive widgets. So I've just chucked a label in the bottom now, and one of the packing options of the WebView was to fill all available space and expand, basically, so that you don't want to be looking at half a screen of a label, you want to be looking at Facebook or whatever you guys look at, porn or something. But yeah, I'm chucking on a little signal handler for a property change of the URI. I just assign that label, which was created just above, the text property of the current URI. So when you change it, when you navigate places, that should update. If we had working internet, I would click on different items and it would update down the bottom. We can see that we're at luakit.org at the moment, and that would move around a bit. Next is theming options. Due to I don't know if it's legacy or something, but GTK labels don't have a drawable window at the back, so you've got to put them in an event box. But that's just some quirk that you have to get around by design. Okay. Okay, no worries. I knew there was some reason for it. So yeah, we check the label in an event box, and we draw a background on the event box, which has a window, and then change the font and otherwise for the actual label, which is our URI widget. And then you start to get something that looks half decent. Obviously, we're at beginner steps at the moment, but then you can do some creative rearranging inside to pack all like objects in the one area. This is all under the hood. It's not actually visually changing anything, but I've just chucked. I'm going to be calling the bottom bar a status bar, and chucking everything that relates to loading status or scroll percentage and all that in the status bar. Again, that's the only change that happened between the last one. Nothing visual changed, but I'm just showing you the progressive steps that I would go through to create this browser again with the foreknowledge that I currently have. I would start basic like this and then continue. I mean, the default config at the moment is near on 6,000 lines again. So it's 6,000 lines of C code and 6,000 lines of Lua, which create the actual browser. So it's obviously very beginner steps, but this is how I would start to structure it, initially at least, because you've got to deal with multiple windows, multiple tabs, and all that other stuff. It's all just trying to make it simple at the moment. Yeah, so this font size is really wrecking the presentation, but I've just chucked in another horizontal layout box, which allows me to now stack things in the status bar horizontally, so I can just have a URI widget and then multiple widgets after that down the bottom to, that's how we're just going to lay it out. Just something that seems to work, because and then the other change is watching on the web view the progress changes, property changes, and then just updating it. So if I had internet working, it would be pretty okay. It would show the current loading percentage of the current page in blue, because I also went to the trouble of theming it as well. And then when it's not needed, when everything's 100% loaded, it just hides itself. So these are other methods of the labels, hide and show, which are just plain. If you have any familiarity with GTK, there's a lot of the similar properties and functions are available, like setting the pretend width of the widget or something else, so that you can affect its packing options and space allocations and stuff. I mean, it's all probably not what everyone would get into, but yeah, it works out. All right. And then another signal handler. What if I might try to get internet working? No, I didn't. I'm just going to use my phone. Here we go. Yeah, I'll just use this thing temporarily. There we go. So the change in this iteration is I've got signal handlers for link hovering and link unhovering to update that URI widget with the current hovered link. So it gives you an idea of where you're going. Just another simple example. Of course, I'm not going to try and walk through everything, but here's our little loading widget from earlier. That's working quite nicely. And it's going to hide as soon as we're done. But this internet's pretty slow, so bear with me. And then, yeah, what we've just done is, captured the link hovering and unhovering, which is then changing the text of that link widget, that URI widget. So, just going to show what's possible, at least on a very basic level, and you just keep stacking those features on top of each other until you get something that resembles something that you would use on a daily basis. But that's all good and fun, but there's no bindings yet. So nothing that you type will affect anything. So this is where I've included the utility library. I mean, it's going to be laborious to try and recreate the key binding matching functions. So I've just, yeah, that would be laborious to try and do in front of you guys. So I've just included it. I don't expect anyone out there to try and recreate that. So I've just put it in a little black box and people are just not going to include it. So now I've created a table of bindings down the bottom, which are very difficult to read on this resolution. Yes. Probably a futile exercise trying to demonstrate it. But in any case, it's very literal. Type in the names of the keys and modifiers you want to hold down at the time, and then a callback function, and then every time you press that key, that callback function will be called. And depending on your setup, like further down the road, if you're in different modes, you can have different functions that perform different tasks. Yeah, it works out very nice. There's also several different types of bindings you can create. There are simple key bindings, then your mouse button bindings, buffer bindings, which if had the time later on and actually created a buffer, it would match using regular expressions the text that you've inputted that hasn't matched anything so far, and then detect when you've entered in some kind of stacked command or something to, you know, something like that. If anyone's familiar with Vim and Vim buffer or anything, does anyone use Vim a lot? I know we've got one nano user here. Yeah, okay. All right, might not be familiar with the buffer then. It's just a bunch of keys that haven't been matched yet, or yeah, just stack. I've got a. Why don't we just run Luakit? This is the default config, and here is the buffer. Just got to pick something that's unique. Keys just stacking up. If it doesn't match anything, it's just going to do nothing. But yeah, this is the default config at the moment, and it has some very nice features. Scrolling percentage and multiple tab support, and all these tabs are created with label widgets, and you know, different theming options.
Well, the buttons you mean it's going to hang on to your keys, your multiple keystrokes until it finds a combination of keys that mean something.
Yes, yes, but not prevent those keys from doing anything else. It just records that you've pressed it, keeps it in a string, and it only records you know, character keys that you press. Obviously, there's no point remembering number buttons or mouse clicks that you press, so it only works in a specific way. Yeah, and then actually earlier I was mentioning following. This is a demonstration of following. So you just press the F key in the default config, and every link on the page will have a number. You could also tab your way through all the available links, and as you start typing something like a portion of the link, like release, it starts to narrow down the possible navigation options that remain, and then you can tab through them and select which ones you like. So that's nice. I use this instead of mouse. I basically don't use mouse when browsing. And then you have all these other different options. Like, let's just scrap the presentation because working in a text editor with like 40 characters on the line is not very nice. So, oops. Let's just try something gimmicky for a moment. We've only recently added this, but this is pretty nice. Oh, also, this is the default config. You've got, at the very top, basically, as I said earlier, everything's optional. If you don't want libunique support, which allows multiple applications to, or which allows you to open links in new windows, I mean, everyone might like it, but if it crashes off and you don't want all your windows to go down at once, you just delete that. I'm a big fan of just deleting parts that you don't like. So this section here, I mean, obviously the size does make it incomprehensible, but this is more of the don't delete this section part. But we get to the optional library section, so you can delete entirely cookie support, delete entirely form filler support. You know, basically just delete everything you don't like, really. And then when we get to the following section, it's now possible to define your own following styles. which I particularly like. And a gimmick that I like is creating a following style with, what do I want? Just 2 characters. I'm not sure if I actually have this compiled, so just bear with me, I've just got to recompile it.
Got yourself a supercomputer there. That's ballsy.
Very tiny code base, that's how. So yeah, what I've just done is created a follow style, which is basically just define your own following keys. Like all the numbers that came up earlier, scrap that. We want to do something completely different. How about binary search? So every single key you press will cut the search space in half. So very well, almost in half. Depends whether you start with zeros or not. But yeah, it's pretty nice until you get down to what you like. So yeah, that's a gimmick. Oh, whoops. Gonna have to. I'll leave that running in the background. What I actually do at home is like to keep all my fingers on the same 4 keys. So I've created, what I've just done is defined the available character set that I can draw upon as purely ASDF and then capital ASDF, so that I can follow any link on the page but without having to remove my fingers off the ASDF keys. So just again, just going to change that to full screen. And then yeah, if you're counting up from 0, I mean whatever base, I mean that's going to be a base of 8, and it's just going to substitute the numbers with the correct digits. But if you're counting up in anything like that, it's always going to start with 1, and then so on. So it's everything. If you don't sort it and reverse it, will be stacked towards the front, stacked towards the start of the counting chain. So everything's going to start with 1, for example. But if you reverse it, as in get the characters that comprise the label, and reverse it and then sort it in order, it means that everything has an even distribution of starting digits. So instead of starting with only 1s all the time and so on, everything starts with something unique. So here it is again. I can follow anything on the page just by narrowing down the search, or SA or something, you know, to go to the GTK website. Yeah, that's nice. And then, you know, got all these other wonderful things like quick marks and varying levels of bookmark support. I've actually got a lot of stuff to finish on the bookmark side. But there's also a very Chrome-like history support. History is using those really tiny SQLite wrappers that I mentioned earlier, and very, very easy to sort through all your links. It's got pagination support. I've obviously, this is a fairly recent database because I didn't want all my other stuff to jump in there, but yeah, it's very nice. Depends what you're after, really. Can't really convince anyone, but it works for me and seems to work for another couple of people. So yeah, I thought I'd come and share that.
Questions?
Yes, anyone would like, yeah.
You mentioned 30 odd forks.
Oh, okay. Forking doesn't necessarily mean they're actually going to do anything. Forking just means the person was interested enough to make sure that that stays around if you or me delete it. So that just means they have a complete copy that they can access any time. The actual percentage of people that contribute back via GitHub, where the number of forks are written, I mean, it's obviously not the total number of people that have contributed, but yeah, there is a small fraction, maybe by small I mean like 30, 40% that actually contribute back. You can have a look at the GitHub, probably should have demonstrated that. I'm not sure how it's going to turn up on 640 though. The resolution is pretty horrible. Oh, no, wrong one. So yeah, this is the network graph. Does take a while to load.
I'm just trying to think what browsing behavior, like what things I use a browser for. This wouldn't do.
This wouldn't do? No?
I can't. Like, no, I'm just trying to think of all the things that I use a bloated browser for.
Yeah.
Which of those things couldn't this do? I can't think of any right now.
Oh yeah, so apart from ad blocking. Basically, apart from ad blocking. That's a good one, because WebKit GTK doesn't have a very nice at all way of ad blocking iframes or navigation requests or stuff like that. So it's all done ad hoc at the moment. I would really like some person out there to add that feature, but that's something that we can't fix on our end. But some people have used Privoxy with ad blocking lists to actually modify the incoming web pages to your computer through a local proxy to strip out all the ads. So that's been one option. Yeah.
Another option is to just hide something like the font style sheet, which just does regex some URLs to stop showing things that they think are probably ads. Works alright.
Okay.
Is that using one of the back-end databases like the ad blocking mods do?
It's just one style sheet. There's this support
Custom style sheet
style sheets.
loading. Yep. Yeah, it does.
In that case, there's ways.
Excellent. Because that was one of our problems, not having the actual page elements hiding. Because with a bit of work, you can kind of do navigation request blocking. There's no simple way of making that nice. It's really something that is lacking at the moment. But yeah.
Early on in the presentation, you were saying one of the nice things about Lua is that the only things available is the stuff which you make available to you. You
Yeah.
also said that there's other GTK bindings where you've written your own ones for this. People who might be familiar with the other bindings can't carry over their knowledge to Luakit.
Perhaps our bindings are very tiny. You basically create the object, and then there's a couple of properties which affect its style or text. There's not really much to compete with. I didn't want to go with a fully fledged GTK toolkit because it's just way too much overhead. We don't need that functionality. I mean, we've basically got, as long as you have a basic familiarity, you can carry over pretty well, in fact, because if you have a basic familiarity with how their widgets are packed and the basic methods of each, the requirement of showing items and because, and obviously you have to be pretty religious with the items that you create, because most items hold a reference to themselves in the garbage collector, so you have to actually destroy them if you want to have multiple windows running and not leave all the windows that you close having abandoned widgets everywhere and stuff. Yeah, I try to be careful about that, but yeah, they can carry over. Kind of. Ours is a lot simpler.
So have you looked at the G-object introspection system so that you didn't actually need to write bindings for each of the widgets?
I haven't. Honestly, I'm more of a pragmatist than if I can get it to work and make it look nice, well then, yeah.
Well, what does it look like on ACID? I mean, the ACID test,
100%.
not... Yeah?
Yeah, it uses WebKit GTK, so WebKit GTK is 100%, so yeah.
Brilliant. And is there HTML5 support in the libraries you're using for rendering?
Depending on the version. I'm using an old version at the moment, but I believe 1.4 has pretty substantial HTML5 support.
Okay.
I mean, I can watch videos. It has some of CS3, most CSS3 stuff in it. Yeah, it's there. It's in the works at least.
Right.
You can download and run experimental versions of WebKit GTK that have slightly better support, but yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it's being worked on, but not by me. So.
Any other questions from anyone?
Fairly naive question. What's the relationship between micro browsers and the apps that we have in our little devices, like phones and iPads and so forth?
Do you mean?
Well, I don't know what those browsers are that are
Yeah, they're actually
Android and
the term is a bit ambiguous. Browsers that you find on mobile phones are also called microbrowsers, but on the desktop sense, they don't entirely share very many things at all. In fact, it's just another definition. Microbrowsers on the desktop sense typically don't need the cut down, because it's only really the UI that's cut down on the phone. It's still got all the bloat underneath. So yeah, this is more or less. This is not going to load. In fact, I'll just quit that. But yeah. Also another option. This is also created just purely by labels for your command completion, and we've also got several other mechanisms for history completion, so you can start typing a URL and basically things that you'd expect to find in a browser. But yeah, the relationship's not really there. It's just another name for it. Just another.
That's fine. I was just putting my mind.
Yeah, because
to have a small code base supplying the browser on my phone, but
yeah.
maybe they decided to add a
Pandora devices, I think. Are they little tiny Linux boxes?
I'm not sure. Pandora, you heard of them?
They're like a gaming console, Linux gaming console with the little keypads or something or other.
The Pandora device? I'm not sure.
No? Oh, there's.
You seen them, yeah?
Yeah. It turns out that this makes an awesome companion to that because you don't have much UI space, browser space at all, and you've got a full QWERTY keypad, and just typing away at the different commands, it works pretty nicely. So that's a market that's been almost saturated. That's something I forgot to mention earlier, but yeah, there is a market for this on tiny devices, but perhaps not phone. I mean, I don't have a QWERTY keypad on here that's easily available. It's all touchscreen, so a piece of
very different.
yeah. But depending what you're doing.
Powerful processors and
Oh, I'd hazard that it might be able to do it, but it is tiny. But but I don't know. It's all about WebKit GTK. I mean, when I say tiny, I mean the stuff that I've done is tiny, but the actual code base of WebKit GTK is huge. Again, it's multi-million lines of rendering code and other JavaScript stuff. Yeah, so it's really just an illusion. It's tiny on the user's side. The stuff that, as long as you don't mind using that big black box that's a WebView widget, well then everything else is just within arm's reach. Everything in that box is just yeah.
Cool. Any other questions for anyone to wrap up? No? All right then, well please thank Mason.
No worries. It was a pleasure.